here and what we're doing. So tonight is really for the registrars and the junior doctors. This is something we've put together to thank you for being part of the unit and for running the show, so to speak. I know John can't be here tonight, and I think Sophia's on call. And it's just a little thank you to you guys for working your butts off, because we've all been there. We all remember our times when we were on call and getting calls. I think I heard the record number of calls is like 150 in 24 hours or something. So we don't get those anymore, but you guys still do. So we thank you for your efforts. We thank you for your work. I really hope tonight's going to be interesting, educational and fascinating. I'm sure it will be. Before we get on to that, I also want to thank some of the special guests we've got here tonight, the nurses from the clinic, as well as Sal, Caroline. And well, we wouldn't be here. We would, but not as well. The clinic wouldn't run as well. The department would certainly not run as well without you guys. You keep us on our toes, you keep us going. If we get the patients through, you pick up on our mistakes and you help us out. So thank you very much, and we hope you've had a good night so far, and it's going to get better, I'm sure. Now, we've got a couple of big hitters here tonight. Neither of them need introduction. Havinder, who we all know is keeps us on our toes in the meetings and is a deep thinker, and I really enjoy his tutorials. So thank you for helping me out tonight. I know you gave me some ideas on how tonight's going to run, so we'll really look forward to it. We've invited Mr John Bartlett to come tonight, and we invited him to come because he's got such a great reputation, but that's because of all the things he's done, because of all the things, people he's touched. I was lucky enough to see him, I think 2 weeks ago we were in Boston, and he received probably one of the biggest awards in international orthopaedics, the Isocos Lifetime Freddie Fu Award. And he gave a fantastic speech that touched a lot of people, and he had a standing ovation. He's got a really strong passion for education and for bringing people together for collaboration. And even in the small chats we've had tonight, that's shown through. So really fosters that amongst us. He's a pioneer arthroscopist in Australia. I think he's one of the first, and taught a lot of people that have probably taught us and then taught others how to do it properly. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I just heard a few names of fellows that he's had from Perth, where I'm from, and he just named 6 off the bat, and all 6 of them have taught me, and they're all fantastic teachers to me, and now I can see where they picked that up from. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mr Bedi, who's going to run the panel, and you just pass the microphone between two. Does this sound okay?
Yep. Okay. Firstly, Iswadi, thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. I don't know how many of you know John. John truly is one of our idols. John has done an immense amount for orthopaedics. He's done an immense amount for his patients, and he's done an immense amount for teaching and collaboration internationally, which many of you won't know about. So it really is a privilege to get to ask him a few things about himself and what he thinks about orthopaedics, and to listen to those views. So I thought we'd start off, John, if it's okay, with a bit like as a beginning. I understand you grew up in Warburton. Tell us about that.
Well, thanks, Iswadi. Thanks, Havinder. I remember a president of the American Academy of Orthopaedic Surgeons at one time, and he introduced his guest speaker, and the guest speaker said, well, that's the sort of introduction I could listen to all day long. And at one stage I thought I might have to. So, yeah, look, I grew up in Warburton, which is about an hour and a half that way, and very small country town it was at the time, less than 1,000 people, but it was a different way of life. It was a timber town, and you know, they had 5 churches in a town of just 900 people. half the town was run by the settled Ventus, and the big wheat bix factory was there. So all the wheat bix, which you'll still buy from supermarkets, they were all made in here. Walking was old man, worked up in the bush, and I think one of the reasons I wound up doing medicine is what my mother said: "Well, you're not going into the bush. Keep your head down." We ran out of school at year 8, and then there was no more school, so I got sent down at the tender age of just 13 to live with my grandmother in Melbourne, and soon got sent to Melbourne High School, where I spent the teenage years.
I understand, John, you were probably a tennis player from all accounts, and at one point, clearly very talented. It crossed your mind to actually think about doing this a bit more seriously. Is that true?
The older you get, the better you want to work. And I did get good enough to be beaten by some good players. It did cross my mind at one stage, but and I remember kind of a career-changing event when a player called Alan Stone, who finished up playing Davis Cup tennis for Australia and still does some media work. Alan, he was about 6 months younger than me, and in a fairly important event, Alan beat me, and I thought, I'm not sure what I could possibly do to beat him, so moved on to more scholastic things.
So we went on to obviously do pretty well at school, I imagine. And then at that time, I assume it was just Melbourne University that had a medical school when you went and did that?
Well, that in itself was interesting, because when I finished year 12, I had the option of going to Monash University in its first year of the medical faculty, or Melbourne University in its 100. And the Melbourne University had been going for a lot more than 100 years, but the medical faculty was in its 100th year, so I stumbled into that.
Having got through that and decided that, and bang, this was going to be your career. Tell us about your intern and resident time, where you did that.
Yeah, well, the intern, because of it, up the Yarra boy, I did my junior residency, as it was called, here at Box Hill Hospital. And so I always identified with it, and I noted the changes, and they're just astonishing, the changes. I mean, it was so different back there. It was almost a rural hospital, but the orthopaedics came into it fairly early, because usually in junior residency you did things like casualty and general medicine and general surgery. But John Critchley was head of one of the 2 orthopaedic units here, and I did a term with Critch, as he was called, John Critchley, and he was a wonderful man who was a role model to me for many years afterwards, and a great supporter in terms of giving me references and guidance as to where I'm going next. And orthopaedics was so different back then. The all long bone solid fractured femurs and that were treated in traction, and there was all the Hamilton Russell and all these other Pearson knee attachments and the Thomas splits and things, and it looked like a sailing club in the orthopaedic ward with all these weights and traction things. So I did that first year term with Critch in orthopaedics, and he said, I want you to go to the Austin next year, because he said, I want to introduce you to the spinal surgery and all the other things that were happening there. So the second year, and I have to say that I graduated in 1967, so 1968 was spent here, and then 1969 at the Austin. And there I I'm just a second-year resident, and there I did another orthopaedic term, this time with John Grant. And John Grant is one of the very, very few orthopaedic surgeons who was interested in sports injuries. And he looked after a lot of the football teams, and he took me under his wing as well, and I would go and assist him privately, and he'd be assisting these people whose names are on the back pages of the newspapers. And so I learned how to do things like anterior cruciate ligament reconstructions from John, and he actually did the first ACL reconstruction at Australia.
So I suppose a couple of questions just with that. What particularly drew you to orthopaedics at the time that was still being in an era where there were general surgeons that essentially practiced orthopaedics? You obviously decided to go down a more specific pathway. Why particularly orthopaedics at that point?
Well, the subspecialties of orthopaedics came a little bit later, but the attraction of orthopaedics, I think it was always going to be surgery because of the kind of semi-physical nature of it, and then I was very interested in plastic surgery. Did a year of that. I was actually interested because of role models in ENT, but what you finish up doing is a kind of a combination of a few things. It's what you actually enjoy. Number two, what you think you might be good at. And number three, probably more importantly, is what other people think you might be good at, because they're the ones who open the doors for you.
Now, I've heard you allude in the past to your time in South Africa. Well, you spent some time. It sounded like that was an incredible experience that shaped many of the things that you do and you think. Where did that slot in? How long were you there for? What did it do for you?
Well, that was quite a story. When I was in final Orthopaedic Registrar year, heading towards the exams, the ABC travelling fellows from the so-called English-speaking orthopaedic associations came through Melbourne, and they selected one registrar to kind of chaperone one of the travelling fellows. And I was to chaperone a travelling fellow from the United States, a guy called Rodney Deal. He was the name, he became a great foot and ankle surgeon from Portland, Oregon. And so I drove him around the place, and you do the usual things, taking the Hills little sanction, and they kind of pick up a koala and that sort of stuff. And he actually said to me, "You're finishing this year, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Oh, I don't know." And he said, "The two greatest orthopaedic centres in the world that we've been to are Toronto and Johannesburg." I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." So that was right. And then I passed the fellowship exam while I was a registrar of the Children's. And Peter Williams, who was the boss of the Children's Hospital, and in fact the boss of orthopaedics in the whole of Australia, a very powerful man, and PFW, as he was named, he said, "John, where are you going next year?" And I said, "I think I'm going to Toronto." And he said, "No, you're not." I said, "Oh, where am I going?" He said, "You're going to Johannesburg." I said, "Johannesburg? Why am I going to Johannesburg?" And this was 1973. And I was, I'd voted for Gough Whitlam in the 1972, December 1972 elections, this not long afterwards. And Gough got in, and he was very much anti-apartheid and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, I'm not sure about Johannesburg. Why am I going to Johannesburg, Mr. Williams? And he said, well, Professor Du Toit, who ran orthopaedics in South Africa, do toy staples for shoulder reconstructions and things. Toy has told me that Australia has the worst orthopaedic training program in the world. He has had an appalling Australian fellow there, and he will never ever take another Australian for further training in South Africa. The PFW says, you're going to Johannesburg, and if you don't restore our reputation, don't come back. So, crikey, I thought, all right. Well, it sounded a little bit exciting, I must say. So we went there totally impoverished, and it got worse because golf had, because of apartheid, he'd withdrawn reciprocal recognition of university degrees from South Africa, because there used to be this English-speaking thing, they recognised degrees from Canada or whatnot, and the South Africans had reciprocated. So I landed there with no money and no job and no qualifications. And there was a man called Louis Solomon, who I'd like to talk about a bit more later on. But anyway, it took about 5 weeks, but Louis solved the problem. Eventually I was accredited. And they sent me to the Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto, the so-called Black Township on the periphery. And I'd never seen anything like it. This was a hospital with 3,000 beds, all at ground level. You did a ward round by car. There were no imaginary complaints, and not a single psychiatrist on the staff. And there was a Mr Bartlett, who was a paediatric surgeon, and they said to me, "What do you want to be good at?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know. I'm just a general sort of like, but I think I'm pretty good at paediatrics, because the children's hospital here probably had the best teaching program." I said, I think I want to be a paediatric orthopaedic surgeon. So he said, right. He said, I'll put you in the club foot clinic on Monday morning. So I went to the club foot clinic, and Bill Dennis Brown splinters and plaster, and I saw 90 patients with club feet on the Monday morning. So and so this went on for about a month, and it was just overwhelming, all this sort of stuff, dislocated hips and teeth. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I want to be a paediatric orthopaedic surgeon anymore. And he said, well, what are you going to be? And I said, well, the Melbourne training program, the plastic surgeons do all the hands, and I'm an orthopaedic surgeon, but I did a year of plastics. I'd like to know a bit more about hands. So he said, right, I'll put you with Sid Biddulph in the hand clinic. Well, I went into the hand clinic, and a couple of nights later, there was a tribal fight between the Zulus and the Xhosas or something, and they're all trying to stab each other, and these guys are grabbing the knife as it's coming in. And in one night, I sewed up 21 patients with flexor tendon injuries at the hand. And crikey. This went on for a little while. I said, I don't think I want to be a hand surgeon anymore. What do you want to do next? And I said, well, look, I'm actually pretty well trained in spinal surgery. I said, I've done a bit of spinal work on the spinal cord injuries at the Austin, and did a bit of scoliosis at the children's and that sort of thing. And I looked at and I said, oh, right. He said, we'll put you in leg and neck and spinal clinic. Well, at the children's, we did the 40-degree idiopathic scoliosis curves, like this. Well, there, the scoliosis was like that. And the TB kyphosis of things were like this. And this was just massive surgery. I lasted there about 5 weeks or so, and I said, I don't think I want to be a spinal surgeon. And he said, well, look, your time's nearly up. He said, you have to go down to Professor Solomon. And Louis Solomon was the professor. He headed up the whole thing, and he was a man who really guided most of the rest of my life, because he was an orthopaedic surgeon, but he was also a rheumatologist. So you could call him an orthopaedic rheumatologist. He knew all about the immunology and the pharmacology, not only the surgery of rheumatoid arthritis, which was very common at the time. And so I worked with Louis, who was the best teacher I ever came across. And it wasn't very long before I wanted to be another Louis Solomon. I wanted to be an orthopaedic rheumatologist. And he continued that influence on me after that. Louis then sent me, after I finished my year in Johannesburg, he sent me to Michael Freeman at the London Hospital to learn about knee replacements. So that was 1974. I finished in Johannesburg. 1975, I went to London with Mike Freeman.
That's a fantastic journey and an incredible insight. So I can see how that shaped you. So you've alluded to a couple of your mentors. You've been a mentor to many, many people, these fellows, your registrars and countless others. What made, it sounds like John Grant was a mentor, for example, and Professor Solomon. What do you think made them good mentors, Michael? What does it take to be a good mentor?
Yeah, well, probably no two mentors are exactly the same. John Grant taught me that the difference between teaching and learning. Creating hardly said a word. So if you're going to get something from him, you had to just watch and learn. He wasn't a teacher. Louis Solomon was quite different. He would be talking all the time and teaching. So what makes them good as a mentor, I think we're all inspired by people we admire, which are not trying to be a poet, but you are inspired by people you admire, and there was no question that I admired those guys.
So if we move to knee surgery, that's been a large chunk of your career. You've come back wanting to be a rheuma surgeon.
Yeah.
That's evolved obviously into different aspects and now more of a knee surgeon, particularly a sports surgeon. So I'm just going to ask you, you've seen the better part of 74 through to 2023, 50 years of knee surgery. What do you think we've done well in that time?
Yeah, well, it's the sports surgery part of it came later. I was back in Melbourne by the end of 1975, thinking I wanted to be a rheumatologist. In fact, started up the first orthopaedic rheumatology clinic, working with the rheumatologists at the Austin and keeping that going. And I thought I knew a bit about knee replacements, which were in their infancy then, from the work with Michael Freeman. But what I also noted in Europe, which was completely different to here, that in Europe, rheumatologists were doing arthroscopy of the knee for biopsies and injections and lavage, that sort of thing. Nobody did any treatment type things, therapeutic things. That I thought to complete the rheumatology side of it, I needed to learn arthroscopy. So this is now about 1976. I bought an arthroscope. You had to buy everything yourself in those days. The hospitals didn't have any. And so I bought an arthroscope and a light source, and then I had to learn how to use it. And to the horror of my wife, I trashed a whole series of oranges because I there's no cameras, you just got the thing on your eye. I'll stick the arthroscope into the middle of the orange, and then the secret of arthroscopy is triangulation. So by putting them in the right eye on the thing, and I put needles in right hand, left hand, so I can find the end of the arthroscope and the tip of the orange, and which weren't much use after I'd done that. But they got the hang of it. So not long afterwards, you've then got someone who's really wanting to be a rheumatologist. But through John Grant, I knew how to do ACL reconstructions, and I knew how to do arthroscopy, and hardly anybody else did. So that led to sports injury referrals, because I had mates that I'd gone through uni with who were now looking after football teams, and they sent these guys along, and that created its own problems for me, because it's pretty true that you've got a young, smart aleck surgeon who's operating on some fairly famous people with a fairly new technique. It attracts attention. And the next thing I knew, I got the name in the back pages of the newspapers. And 1980 in particular stands out because I did an arthroscopic partial meniscectomy on a very famous footballer who was a household name, and everybody knew him. In fact, they still know him, and his kids. And anyway, a day or two later, the big cartoon appeared in a fellow called Weck in the newspapers, and it's got this cartoon of a player lying on the bench in a trainer's room, and the coach has opened the door of the room and says, "You've finished operating on his knee, yet the umpires are back on the field." Well, some of us thought that was a bit amusing, but I had colleagues who were not the slightest bit impressed, and they felt threatened by these new technologies, and indeed they threatened me. And so it was really to try and regain trust with them all that I had to kind of share results and techniques and all that.
So it sounds like we've gotten clearly the arthroscopic techniques, and got people back on fields faster and things like that. Their replacements look like they're a little bit more reproducible, although we still produce some unhappiness. What do you think hasn't really progressed, or what are your disappointments that we haven't really got right in knee surgery? Are any of those? What do you think we should have done better with?
I think understanding the biology of healing. I think the pendulum swing, and from doing everything conservatively to doing everything operatively, the pendulum goes across a bit too far. When you've got these kind of new techniques, you've got these instruments, there's a tendency to feel that everything can be fixed with an operation. That is not true. I think we failed to appreciate the biology whereby look after them properly, and some things can heal conservatively, meaning non-operatively. And that's coming out now. There's been, I think the current younger generation of surgeons are going to face a lot more scrutiny as to whether someone really needs that operation or whether there's another way. That initially came through with arthroscopy for degenerative diseases, and a lot of studies, prospective comparative studies, showing that the 2-year results when you operate on them or not are much the same. There will still be indications for surgery, but take anterior cruciate ligament injuries. We went from the 1960s, where none had surgery, to the 2010s, where basically everyone who got the diagnosis had surgery. Why fellows come to you for more information, and I think I noted, which I was trying to resist in the last few fellows that I had, they came to work with me wanting to know how to do things. They didn't come to me wanting to know pathology or clinical diagnosis or contraindications or things like this. They just want to know how do you do it? And once they got that, and they think, oh, well, they've kind of got enough out of me. And I think if you look at where we're getting our information, the companies, a lot of it, surgical techniques, be it robotics or anything else, it's the companies that are doing the teaching for it. I think it's a big responsibility of the teachers and the mentors to teach these things about when not to operate, when to decide that there's another way, what is best for this particular person, what is the actual etiology and pathology, and what are the complications and potential benefits and risks. And I was certainly enticed, even seduced by some new technology in years gone by, synthetic ligaments, collagen meniscus implants, allografts for soft tissue work, and I had a pretty high failure rate in a lot of those new things that were sold to me by the companies, and I didn't it took a long time to learn how to assess a patient. And I remember one time in outpatients at the Austin, and I was just a brand new consultant, and John Grant sent me this case. He said, you go and do this one. And it was the simplest case. It was just a loose body on a knee, which was voicing some locking of the knee, a little bony loose body, and he said, you look after her. I said, why don't you do it? That'll get easier than that. He said, no, she's a hot potato. I said, what do you mean? She's a hot potato, he said. And well, I did operate on her, and she was a hot potato. And that's just, it ended badly. I mean, physically everything seemed to go all right, but a very unhappy patient. And I later gave a lot of talks on anterior knee pain and various other patella-related conditions. And there's a fellow, I was a godfather of the Cleveland Clinic at one stage, and the fellow there called Jack Andrews, and he started up an anterior knee pain clinic for all these anterior knee pains and resistant to everybody's care. And he got them seen with multiple specialists, social workers, psychiatrists, physiotherapists, and things like that. And of these sort of recalcitrant patients, he found that 45% of them had deep psychological problems. You know, there was, and these are teenagers mostly, and then with psychological problems with domestic abuse, and sometimes even worse than that, that were underlying these symptoms. And I played golf with a very good mate of mine who's a paediatric psychiatrist, and I told him about Jack Andrews' work, and he said, if you're asking a question of a patient and somebody else gives the answer, which may be the parent or parent, if you ask a question of a patient, someone else gives the answer, there's something deep and troubling, and the patient has something to hide or suffering. So it takes a long time to learn things like that.
Thank you for that insight. That's I think is fantastic advice. Lastly, there's a number of aspiring surgeons here who are about to start and embark upon their careers. Sounds like it's been fun. You certainly helped a lot of people. Do you have any tips for new surgeons about to start on how to organise your practice, how to make sure you have fun, and to make sure you do your best?
Getting back to what I mentioned earlier about that cartoon, there's a very famous total knee replacement surgeon in America called Dickie Jones from Texas. And Dickie talks about what he calls the credo of the wolf pack. And he said what the wolf pack does is they respect the elders, they teach the young, but they cooperate with the pack. And I took all that on board a bit late maybe, but I think you need to consider your colleagues, be it older, younger or contemporary. Consider your colleagues in pretty much everything you do, what reaction they might have to what you say and do, because you need your colleagues, and orthopaedics really is a team game. And so, as Dickie would say with the wolf pack, you cooperate with the pack. So that'd be the first thing. In terms of setting up your practice, I do acknowledge the kind of recent trend, and I think I said to Iswadi or Rafal that you tend these days to think you've got to subspecialise. And as I say, it happened to me bit by bit after I wasn't coming to. But you go into the fellowship, you come back and you say, look, I'm going to be the Melbourne's elbow surgeon, and send me all your elbows. And if you go to the public hospital, then you're going to have to pull your weight and do your bits and pieces and look after everybody. But if you go to join a group of 15 other surgeons and you go to them because they haven't got an elbow surgeon, and they say, yeah, all right, well, look, I'm doing the shoulders, and he's doing the knees, and he's doing the spines, and he's doing the hands, we'll give you the elbows. So you think that's pretty attractive. So you go there and do elbows. But I just get a feeling you're not really paying back into the system. And I very much admire the people who give back into the system and do the teaching into the public hospital system. You look after the medical students, and you look after the residents, and you look after the registrars on training programs, and probably more than anything else, you actually look after yourself. And I left the public hospital system after 25 years as a consultant. I still had a fellowship program going, and I'm doing teaching there, but bit by bit, the thing I missed most was the public hospital appointment, and especially the outpatients, because you'd be there in outpatients, there's a whole bunch up you there, you'd pick up an x-ray and it's like, I've never said this before. And you'd sort of show it to a colleague, you'd show it to a registrar, and you'd sort of swap experience, and that sort of collegiality, that sort of teamwork, I think is very, very important.
So I've still got a stack of questions here, but I think we'll bring things to a close. I'd firstly like to ask anyone, do they have any questions that they'd like to ask John? Iswadi.
You remember a particular fellow that you thought was particularly interesting or good at what they did, and get any story around a particular fellow that you may have heard?
That is me. I think I had all up nearly 100 fellows, 90 something, between, it started. I'll try and answer the question soon, Iswadi, but I mentioned Louis Solomon from Johannesburg, who I wanted to be an orthopaedic rheumatologist. He sent me to Mike Freeman in London and learned total knee replacements. And then as I got busier and I had to kind of share information more to defend myself than anything else, sort of presenting and results and all that sort of stuff. And towards about 1988, Louis Solomon by now had moved to be professor at Bristol. and he'd revised and rewritten Graham Apley's wonderful textbook on orthopaedics, which Mark would know the original edition very well. Just a great textbook. And Louis rewrote that, which then became known as Apley and so on. It's orthopaedics. And probably still, if it's still being printed, the best orthopaedic textbook. But Louis, again, had a massive influence on me because he started my fellowship program. Because I was doing ACL reconstruction, arthroscopy and knee replacements, and especially in England, not much of that was happening. He started sending people from Bristol to work with me on 6-month rotations, and that spread and got bigger and bigger. And so I always owe a debt to Louis. The individual fellows, they were always a joy and an inspiration to me, and I continue to follow their careers. I look up the contents of every journal that comes across my desk. I look up the various congresses and the faculties and who's speaking, and I delight when I see previous fellows there. 3 of the last presidents of the British Knee Society have been fellows, and gave me the President's Medal just the other day. And so that's a big joy when they rise to those heights. You haven't really done a great job as a kind of mentor come teacher come this or that if your fellows don't rise to greater heights than you have. So it probably would be wrong to name the various ones that you know in Melbourne. But yeah, two that quickly come to mind in Melbourne, and there have been, I'm not sure, maybe a dozen from Melbourne and about 15 from New Zealand and a lot from Europe and so on and so forth. I did appreciate having fellows from Asia and especially Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific region, and always been very involved in the Asia-Pacific scene. But yeah, probably that Hayden Morris is currently president of the Australian Knee Society. Julian Feller has been just a wonderful friend and has advanced his field of knee surgery and teaching to a greater degree, and has always had my friendship and support and respect, and great people, really great people.
Red.
This might be a bit prickly, but all those things you've talked about is been very valuable. But I find that one of the best things to learn from people with high echelon is how they deal with failures. Can you talk about, in general principle or specific examples, how you deal with disappointments, failures, be it complications, legal problems, children running amok, yeah, and that sort of the urge when you're having difficulties, having to scratch your heads. How do you deal with that? What advice to give?
Yeah, it hurts. It really hurts. I recall there's a cocky young consultant on stage having a cocktail party where there were different surgeons involved, and one of the guys there was a urologist called Louis Somerset, and something came up about success rates, and Bluey said it's impossible to get better than 85% success rate, no matter what type of surgery you're talking about. And me and my somewhat overconfident, I'll turn it up and said, we did better than that. And he said, name one. I thought, well, hammer toes. I mean, you've got a corn on the toe to straighten it out and corn's gone. No. He said, you still can't get better 85%. I said, well, where's the 85% come from? He said, well, Jesus had a failure rate of 1 in 12. And then he said, you're not going to beat that. That's the gold standard, he said. So, oh, yeah, okay. So I had to take that on board. And as a matter of fact, he was pretty right, because you objectively think you're going pretty well, but there'll be a dissatisfaction rate among your patients. But that's just dissatisfaction, and success equals meet expectations. So if the expectations are there and you meet those expectations, then you will have success. But when you get a genuine failure, that is devastating. I just one example. I was probably doing more posterior cruciate ligament reconstructions than anybody in Australia at one point in time. And as always, I thought I was pretty good at them. And then I hit the popliteal artery. And that was a devastating complication. In many respects, I was lucky that there was a vascular surgeon available. I came back, and in a long, very difficult procedure, the patch grafting, and then that failed, and another repair. Took all night, and legs saved, but big scars, fasciotomies, stuff like that. She was a state champion gymnast, and when faced with that, it's happened. You, number one, have to communicate with the family to a degree that you've never communicated with anyone else's family ever before. You just got to be with them all the time, and answer all the questions, and be available all the time. You can't just kind of run away and hide. Secondly, you've got to work out how it happened, and then you've got to figure out how it's never going to happen to you again. And so I did all that, and I remained on no legal consequences, ran on good terms with the family. We did studies of the proximity of the popliteal artery to the posterior tibia. After that, inflection extension. I was always taught that when you flex the knee, the popliteal artery fell away from the back of the knee. Well, it does in a normal knee. But in a posterior cruciate ligament deficient knee, where the tibia drops backwards in flexion, it actually gets closer. And in people who've had dislocations and things like that, it may well be adherent to the back of the tibia, which is the case. And it's terrifying. And for example, if you have the knee at 90 degrees of flexion, and you put a drill hole from the anteromedial aspect of the tibia through that guide wires through to the anatomical attachment of the posterior cruciate ligament on the back of the tibia. If that goes another couple of centimetres, you'll hit the popliteal artery 10 times out of 10. So it's a very, very sobering thing, and so that's one complication. Of course, there'll be the occasional infection. and you can learn from that, because infections that could come from basically three areas. Number one, contamination upon the day of surgery, the time of surgery, and you have to develop your protocol so that's unforgivable. You simply cannot have a breach of your infection protocol with your prepping and your draping. You just can't let that happen. The second way it happens can be a trap. And let's say you do a total knee replacement. Patients finally go home. But then there's a bit of weeping from the wound and stuff like that. They keep statistics on you, and they've got all these key performance indicators, and they are several things that are easily measured, and every hospital's got them. The number of day cases that stay overnight, the number of readmissions, and the number of reoperations. And if you start to exceed your numbers, they'd start to look at you. This is what's so good. So you're a bit intimidated as saying, well, no, there's a bit of weeping from the wound, but I know we'll give them some antibiotics, and we'll take a swab, give them some antibiotics, keep them at home for another week and see how we go. And whereas a patient, you probably should be readmitted. And not only that, but maybe even take them back to theatre. But that's a KPI score against you, see, so you're intimidated. And that's probably the biggest mistake you can make. Third type of infection is probably just luck of the draw. It's a late infection, they're going to kidney abscess or something like that, and they'll spread around and so forth. But infections, same with the blood clots. You got to make sure that you've done everything possible to prevent blood clots, because if it winds up in pulmonary embolus, I got to the stage of every single knee replacement patient had an ultrasound before they went home. They'd have a negative ultrasound before they went home. Then I knew, at least on whatever it was, day 5 or whatever, that they didn't have a blood clot. And if they did, and it was a non-occlusive distal thrombosis, they'd be just kept on some anticoagulants. But if it was an occlusive proximal thing, well, then they got heparin and so forth. But the failures, complications, one failure will conquer 200 good results.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much for everyone attending. Thank you again. I'd like to echo Iswadi's sentiments regarding all the nursing staff and the registrars for helping us out, the residents. And importantly, thank you very much, John, for sharing your time. As I said, for what I've been here, I feel honoured the opportunity to ask you a few questions about yourself. Thank you.
Ice creams are melting, so we'll go and have our ice cream dessert there, right? Please enjoy. Maybe let Sophia go first, since she misses dinner.